Imagine a waterway so critical that a disruption lasting only a few days could send fuel prices climbing, unsettle financial markets, and force governments around the world into emergency planning. That isn't a hypothetical scenario. It's the strategic importance of the Strait of Hormuz, one of the most vital energy corridors on the planet. Every day, millions of barrels of crude oil and other energy products pass through this narrow passage connecting the Persian Gulf to the open ocean. For decades, it has served as the heartbeat of global energy trade, linking major oil-producing nations with consumers across North America, Europe, and Asia. When shipping flows smoothly, the global economy barely notices. But when tensions rise, investors, policymakers, and businesses begin paying very close attention. Today, renewed friction between Washington and Tehran is placing this critical maritime route back in the international spotlight. Diplomatic negotiations continue behind closed doors, yet military tensions and political disagreements threaten to overshadow those efforts. Even the possibility of shipping disruptions is enough to influence oil prices, reshape market expectations, and increase uncertainty throughout the global economy. The stakes extend far beyond the Middle East. Higher energy prices can ripple through nearly every sector, raising transportation costs, increasing inflationary pressure, and affecting everything from manufacturing to household budgets. What begins as a regional geopolitical dispute can quickly evolve into an international economic challenge. In this episode of GeoEconomics, we'll examine why the Strait of Hormuz remains one of the world's most important strategic chokepoints, how current U.S. Iran tensions could reshape global energy markets, and why decisions made thousands of miles away may ultimately affect consumers, businesses, and financial markets around the world. After months of heightened tensions, Washington and Tehran have once again turned to diplomacy in an effort to reduce the risk of a wider regional conflict. While the negotiations represent an opportunity to prevent further escalation, they also highlight how fragile peace can be when multiple geopolitical interests collide. Unlike previous rounds of talks that focused primarily on nuclear issues, the current discussions extend into broader regional security concerns. Both sides are attempting to establish a framework that could lower military tensions while creating conditions for greater stability across the Middle East. However, reaching an agreement on paper is only the first step. The far greater challenge is ensuring that every party involved is willing to follow through on its commitments. One of the biggest obstacles is trust, or more accurately, the lack of it. Decades of sanctions, military confrontations, and political disputes have left both governments deeply skeptical of each other's intentions. Every new diplomatic proposal is carefully scrutinized, and even small developments on the ground can quickly alter the political atmosphere surrounding the negotiations. Adding to the complexity is the fact that the United States and Iran are not the only stakeholders. Regional allies, neighboring countries, and international mediators all have their own strategic interests. Decisions made by one government can trigger reactions from several others, making it difficult to separate bilateral diplomacy from the broader geopolitical landscape. This interconnected reality means that progress at the negotiating table can be undermined by events occurring elsewhere in the region. Military operations, security incidents, or political statements from allied governments may create new obstacles before diplomats have the chance to finalize any agreement. As a result, markets remain cautious, recognizing that successful negotiations require more than positive headlines. They require consistent implementation. For investors and energy analysts, these talks are being watched just as closely as military developments. Financial markets often react not only to confirmed events, but also to expectations about future risks. Even rumors of stalled negotiations or renewed confrontation can influence commodity prices, investor sentiment, and currency movements. The diplomatic process therefore represents far more than a political exercise. It has become a key factor in assessing global energy security and economic stability. Whether these negotiations ultimately succeed or fail will depend not only on what is agreed behind closed doors, but also on whether regional actors are prepared to support a broader framework for long-term stability. As the discussions continue, one reality remains clear. Diplomacy may offer the best path toward reducing tensions, but maintaining peace requires cooperation that extends well beyond the negotiating room. Diplomatic negotiations rarely exist in isolation. Even when two governments appear committed to finding common ground, events unfolding elsewhere can dramatically change the direction of those talks. That is precisely the challenge facing the current diplomatic efforts between the United States and Iran. Progress at the negotiating table depends not only on direct discussions, but also on the broader security environment across the Middle East. The region remains one of the world's most strategically complex geopolitical landscapes. Multiple governments, armed groups, international alliances, and competing security interests are deeply interconnected. As a result, military activity in one country can quickly influence diplomatic calculations in another. This creates a difficult environment for negotiators. Every military operation, border incident, or political announcement has the potential to increase tensions and reduce confidence between the parties involved. Even if diplomatic channels remain open, Unexpected developments on the ground can slow momentum or force both sides to reconsider their positions. Another important factor is perception. In international diplomacy, governments do not judge each other solely by official statements. They also evaluate actions taken across the broader region. If one side believes that regional developments contradict the spirit of ongoing negotiations, trust becomes increasingly difficult to maintain. This challenge becomes even more significant when multiple allies and partners are involved. Countries often pursue their own national security objectives, even while broader diplomatic efforts are underway. These overlapping interests can create situations where military actions and diplomatic goals appear to move in opposite directions. For policymakers, balancing these competing priorities is extraordinarily difficult. National security concerns, alliance commitments, domestic political pressures, and economic interests must all be considered simultaneously. A decision intended to strengthen one strategic objective may unintentionally complicate another. Financial markets closely monitor these dynamics because geopolitical uncertainty frequently translates into economic uncertainty. Investors understand that regional instability can disrupt energy production, maritime shipping, insurance costs, and international trade. Consequently, even limited military escalation can influence commodity prices long before actual supply disruptions occur. Energy markets are particularly sensitive to these developments. Oil traders regularly price geopolitical risk into futures contracts, anticipating the possibility that regional tensions could affect production or transportation. As uncertainty increases, market volatility often follows, reflecting concerns about future supply rather than immediate shortages. The diplomatic process is therefore shaped by far more than conversations between government officials. It operates within a constantly evolving security environment where military developments, political messaging, and economic considerations continuously influence one another. Maintaining momentum requires not only successful negotiations, but also a level of regional stability that allows agreements to be implemented with confidence. This interconnected reality explains why diplomatic breakthroughs in the Middle East are often difficult to achieve and even harder to sustain. A single incident can rapidly shift expectations, alter political calculations, and introduce new challenges that negotiators must overcome. For governments seeking lasting stability, diplomacy and regional security cannot be separated. They must advance together. Understanding this broader context is essential because the next issue extends beyond politics alone. At the center of these geopolitical tensions lies one of the world's most strategically valuable maritime corridors, a narrow waterway, whose uninterrupted operation is critical not only for the Middle East, but for the entire global economy. Whenever tensions escalate in the Middle East, one country inevitably finds itself at the center of the conversation: the United States. For decades, Washington has maintained an extensive military, diplomatic, and economic presence throughout the region. That influence has shaped not only regional security, but also the stability of global energy markets. The United States has long viewed the Middle East as strategically significant for several reasons. Beyond counterterrorism and regional security, the region contains some of the world's largest proven oil and natural gas reserves. Although America's own energy production has increased substantially over the past decade, global oil remains a connected market. A supply disruption anywhere can influence prices everywhere, including at American gas stations. Because of these economic realities, U.S. foreign policy has consistently focused on maintaining freedom of navigation, protecting international trade routes, and supporting regional stability. These priorities have led to decades of security partnerships with governments across the Gulf, including military cooperation, intelligence sharing, and defense agreements. Among Washington's closest regional partners is Israel. The relationship extends beyond diplomacy and includes intelligence cooperation, advanced defense technology, joint military exercises, and long-standing security assistance. American leaders from both major political parties have generally described this partnership as a cornerstone of U.S. policy in the Middle East. Supporters argue that these alliances strengthen regional deterrence and help maintain stability in an unpredictable part of the world. They believe strong security partnerships reduce the likelihood of larger conflicts by discouraging potential adversaries from taking aggressive action. Critics, however, offer a different perspective. They argue that continued military assistance can reduce incentives for compromise during periods of diplomatic negotiation. According to this view, lasting regional stability depends not only on military strength, but also on sustained political engagement and credible diplomatic commitments. This debate becomes especially significant during sensitive negotiations. Diplomatic efforts often require confidence-building measures from all parties involved. When military operations continue alongside negotiations, observers may question whether diplomacy is truly the highest priority or whether strategic objectives are competing with peace initiatives. These differing interpretations have fueled extensive debate among foreign policy experts in Washington and around the world. Some analysts believe maintaining military leverage strengthens negotiating positions by increasing pressure during talks. Others argue that excessive reliance on military tools risks undermining diplomatic progress and prolonging regional instability. The economic implications are equally important. Every period of uncertainty affects investor confidence. Energy companies delay investment decisions when regional risks increase. Shipping firms face higher insurance costs. Commodity traders adjust market expectations, often creating additional price volatility long before any actual disruption occurs. Financial institutions closely monitor government statements because markets respond not only to military developments, but also to political messaging. A single announcement regarding sanctions, military deployments, or diplomatic progress can influence oil futures, equity markets, and currency valuations within hours. Another important aspect of American influence lies in its naval presence. The U.S. Navy regularly operates in and around the Persian Gulf, helping secure commercial shipping lanes that support international trade. From Washington's perspective, ensuring freedom of navigation remains essential for both national security and the functioning of the global economy. This military presence also serves as a deterrent against actions that could threaten international shipping. However, it simultaneously illustrates how closely economic stability and geopolitical competition have become intertwined. Security operations designed to prevent conflict can themselves become part of broader strategic rivalries. For global markets, the central question is less about political rhetoric and more about policy decisions. Investors want to know whether diplomatic negotiations will reduce tensions, whether energy exports will continue uninterrupted, and whether governments can prevent regional disputes from evolving into wider economic crises. Ultimately, America's influence in the Middle East extends far beyond military alliances. It affects energy security, financial stability, international trade, and investor confidence across the global economy. Decisions made in Washington often shape expectations in oil markets just as much as developments occurring within the region itself. Yet even the most influential governments cannot completely shield the world from market forces. If geopolitical tensions begin disrupting energy supplies, the consequences quickly spread beyond diplomacy. Oil prices rise, inflation accelerates, supply chains tighten, and governments are forced to consider how prepared they truly are for an extended energy shock. That brings us to one of the most important economic questions of all. How resilient is the global energy system if a major disruption actually occurs? History has repeatedly shown that energy markets respond to uncertainty long before an actual supply crisis develops. Even when oil continues flowing without interruption, the possibility of disruption can reshape investor expectations, influence government policy, and affect the prices consumers pay at the pump. That is why strategic petroleum reserves and global supply chains become increasingly important whenever geopolitical tensions escalate. Most major economies maintain emergency oil reserves designed to cushion the impact of temporary supply shocks. These strategic stockpiles act as an insurance policy, allowing governments to release crude oil into the market if normal supply routes become disrupted. The objective is straightforward: stabilize prices, maintain market confidence, and prevent sudden shortages from damaging economic activity. However, strategic reserves are not a permanent solution. They are intended to provide breathing room during temporary disruptions, rather than replace long-term energy supplies. If geopolitical tensions persist for weeks or months, reserve releases alone cannot fully offset sustained reductions in global exports. This is particularly important because oil is one of the few commodities that affects almost every sector of the economy. Transportation, manufacturing, agriculture, aviation, shipping, construction, and even food production rely heavily on affordable energy. As fuel prices rise, businesses often face higher operating expenses, forcing many to either absorb the additional costs or pass them on to consumers. The effects are rarely limited to gasoline prices. Airlines may increase ticket prices to offset higher jet fuel expenses. Trucking companies experience rising transportation costs, which influence retail prices across thousands of products. Manufacturers pay more to transport raw materials and finished goods, while farmers face higher expenses for fuel, fertilizers, and machinery. Over time, these higher costs can contribute to broader inflation throughout the economy. Central banks closely monitor these developments because persistent energy inflation presents a difficult policy challenge. If inflation accelerates, monetary authorities may consider maintaining higher interest rates for longer periods in an effort to control price growth. While tighter monetary policy can help reduce inflation, it may also slow business investment, consumer spending, and overall economic growth. Financial markets react quickly to these changing expectations. Commodity traders continuously assess geopolitical developments, adjusting oil futures prices based on both current supply conditions and anticipated risks. Equity markets may become more volatile as investors evaluate which industries stand to benefit from higher energy prices and which sectors could face declining profitability. Energy producers often experience stronger revenues during periods of elevated oil prices, while industries heavily dependent on transportation and manufacturing frequently encounter greater financial pressure. Airlines, logistics companies, chemical manufacturers, and consumer goods producers may all experience tighter margins when fuel costs remain elevated for extended periods. Currency markets can also be affected. Countries that import large quantities of oil often see increased pressure on their trade balances as energy bills rise. Meanwhile, major energy exporters may benefit from stronger export revenues, improving government finances and supporting domestic investment. These shifts illustrate how geopolitical developments can influence international capital flows far beyond the region where tensions originate. Businesses increasingly recognize that geopolitical risk has become an essential component of long-term planning. Companies with global supply chains now evaluate not only labor costs and production efficiency, but also shipping reliability, maritime security, and political stability. Diversifying suppliers, expanding inventory levels, and investing in alternative transportation routes have become common strategies for improving resilience against future disruptions. Governments are making similar adjustments. Many countries have accelerated investments in renewable energy, liquefied natural gas infrastructure, domestic energy production, and diversified import sources. While these initiatives cannot eliminate dependence on global oil markets overnight, they reduce vulnerability to concentrated supply risks over the long term. Yet despite these efforts, the global economy remains highly interconnected. A disruption affecting one strategically important shipping corridor can quickly influence prices, investment decisions, and economic confidence across multiple continents. That interconnectedness explains why policymakers closely monitor every development involving major energy producers and critical maritime routes. Ultimately, the greatest economic risk is not necessarily a complete interruption of oil supplies, but prolonged uncertainty itself. Markets dislike unpredictability. Businesses postpone investment when future costs become difficult to estimate. Consumers reduce discretionary spending when inflation rises, and governments face increasing pressure to balance economic stability with foreign policy objectives. These realities explain why energy security has become one of the defining strategic challenges of the 21st century. Maintaining reliable access to affordable energy is no longer simply an economic objective. It has become a cornerstone of national security, international diplomacy, and global financial stability. As negotiations continue and regional tensions evolve, governments must weigh competing priorities, protecting national interests, maintaining strategic alliances, safeguarding global trade, and avoiding actions that could destabilize international markets. The decisions made in the coming months may influence not only the future of the Middle East, but also the trajectory of the global economy itself.